left Pearl Harbor, I didn't know where I was going, and nobody on that ship knew where we were going. We kept going and going and going and going. And all of a sudden, early in the morning, I never saw so many bodies in the water.
I was home from school, just had a weekend home, and I think we just happened to be listening to the radio, and they announced the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and you know, that was serious. There were some boys from Michigan City that lost their lives on the Arizona.
Well, I kind of both. I was going to be drafted anyway, so I said, hey, what are we waiting for? Let's go. Let's get this war over with.
There were about 40 men there as patients, and it was a skin disease ward. Now, having been in the tropics, a lot of the men did get infections. And one particular case that sticks in my mind was a young man that had a ship shot out from underneath him, and he was swimming in the oil-infested water. And the oil clung to his skin. He had no chance, once he was picked up, had no chance to shower and clean clothes, so the oil went into the pores of his back especially. So that's why he came to our ward, because he had these huge boils on them.
I knew Japan was there and all that, but then really didn't think of them as being an enemy. And then all of a sudden, when they bombed us, they were an enemy. And really, to this day, I have a feeling that way too. When I see Japanese, that comes to my mind that they're my enemy. And well, other than that, and I know there's Japanese people and nice people and whatever, but that was the thoughts at that particular time. They're our enemy, and well, you just want to get even. You're going to make up for Pearl Harbor.
I was one of a family of 5 children and my mom and dad. And everything was pretty normal until the war.
Compared to ROTC in high school, I had no training that way. When I was commissioned an officer, I had initial orders to report to Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. And that's where all the veterinarians that were practicing, all the physicians and the dentists went that were being inducted into the service. And they served for 6 weeks learning how to be real soldiers.
I don't know. Most of the people I know were drafted.
That I went right into service after I was educated as a dentist. My first dental duties were in the armed forces. They didn't worry about my future too much because I was not going to be in combat.
The military, to me, is a great place, especially if someone doesn't have a direction.
In the military, you're doing what somebody tells you to do. I mean, that's it. You have to follow orders, and well, that's it. So
I was no giant or else. We did what we felt we had to do, and that's what we did. And everybody worked as a team.
And they finally called me in February of '43. And they called me and I reported to a classification center at Santa Ana, California. The first part of that was to sort of check you out physically and mentally and train you for the Army things like how to make a bed so a quarter will bounce on it. They're very important. And decide whether you would make pilot, bombardier, navigator, or none of the above training programs. Fortunately, I was selected to be a pilot. So the second half of the classification was then to train, give some training, not flying, but ground training for a pilot. Once that was finished, was sent to a primary flight school in north central California. There I learned to fly. First aircraft was a small airplane, single engine, not very complicated, no radio, none of the trimmings that would come later. Passed that and went to the next step, which was the basic flying school. And that was a larger aircraft, more sophisticated with radio and able to fly at night and so forth. At that point, they said, which would you want to be, a multi-engine pilot or a single-engine pilot? Well, most people said, hey, I want to be a fighter pilot. And so they chose single-engine. My rationale was that, yeah, there'd be more people that wanted single-engine fighter pilot school than will be able to be taken there, and they'll wind up in the right seat of another airplane, a multi-engine airplane. And I decided I'd rather be in the left seat.
The nurses were not able to do a nursing as they had thought they should. They'd gone through nursing school just like any girl does today, and that's what they expected in the Navy, but they didn't read the little print. They were office secretaries in a sense. They took care of the patient's records, they wrote down what the doctor ordered, followed through by giving us the orders.
No, one of the things, I'd been reasonably well disciplined, but that's one of the things that some people have trouble with in the military. You lose your freedom when you join. There's no question about it, because the guy above you he's your master, and he will tell you what to do. So it takes a little bit. Some people never adjusted to it, but most of us did. Maybe not happily, but we did.
Well, I had a first sergeant who always gave me a lot of trouble. He'd always yell, me, front and center, you know.
I guess the basic training was the same just about wherever you went. You learned how to use a rifle and hand-to-hand combat, whatever. I mean, they tried to teach you quite a little bit in a short time, and they kept you busy. But, that was it. You didn't have much time on your own. And in fact, the new recruits, I mean, were buck privates and whatever, and well, you were under somebody's watchful eye all the time, and you didn't mess up, or you'd know about it. So push-ups. Anyway, did a lot of those. But, yeah, that was it. It was just good physical training. That's it.
No, when I went to Laredo, Texas, we flew in an open cockpit. We had a 30 caliber machine gun, and another plane would fly along towing a target, and then you would shoot at that target. And that was the first time I ever had an airplane ride or was up in the air.
I went through screening there, and I asked to become and they said, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be an aircraft mechanic. Well, we got plenty of mechanics, but we don't have enough gunners. If you take gunnery school, sign up for gunnery, we'll give you the aircraft mechanics. I said, I don't particularly want the gunnery school. We don't get the aircraft mechanics. I said, okay, sign me up.
It would take 20 people, 2 sticks. Well, you lined up 10 on one side of the plane, 10 on the other. And the first group, you'd get up, stand up, hook up, and close it up and stand in the door. and you did that, you're hooked up to a static line through the center of the plane, and you jumped 10 people. Well, you didn't fool around with that. They had a jump master there, and when you got the order to jump, you jumped. If you didn't freeze, you didn't do anything. You couldn't stand and contemplate and say, is this what I want to do or whatever. You got out of there because you're holding up those people. And all that time, that plane is moving roughly 100, 110, 20 miles an hour, something like that. Well, you can imagine 10 people coming out. You might be strung out a quarter of a mile there. And with those 10, then the plane would circle and come back and jump the other 10.
I got on a troop train, and we went to Salt Lake City, and they put me in a pressure chamber there, and they, I don't know, I was at 30,000 feet, and they dropped me to 12. I had a nosebleed, so I didn't pass a test, but I had access to the card, and I checked it and said I passed it anyway.
One of the things that is important, they pick young people to fight wars because you're invincible. Something bad's going to happen, not going to happen to you. It's going to happen to somebody else. And with that attitude, of course, you get good soldiers. When you get older, you get smarter. To this day, I'm amazed at how well it was organized.
Make secret, swim out someplace and find out things and then come back. There was a name for them, I can't remember. SEAL, yeah, that was like a SEAL.
Chances came up for me to enlist to go to Hawaii, or at least to the South Pacific. And we didn't know particularly where we were going because everything was hush-hush. You got paper orders, and they said, meet at such and such a place in California, things of that nature. So I really didn't know where I'd end up. Got on a nice ship and didn't get seasick. I was proud of myself.
Scared? Well, on a merchant marine ship, and when you got a Navy personnel manning the guns on board that ship, there are a lot of older, when I say older, they were 22, 23 years old, that were, how do you put it, they've experienced a lot during the war. They were torpedoed, or they lost their ship, or something happened. And so that really, when you hear stories like that, and of course, you know, you're young, and you think you're the next one that's going to happen to it, which it didn't. And it's a little shaky. It creates a little problem internally on something like that. But everything worked out real well, so I can't complain.
I was 17, 18 years when I'm in prisoner of war. I became the deacon on my 18 years. Oh, well. I say I feel okay. It's a little bit weak, but I have to help everybody. Cannot carry a thing, but I help it out. You get to help people when your friends and all. You have to do your work. And you are in the army. You like to be a friends, brothers. And so the next morning we have to wake up and you Japanese say, no, you have there the shovel, you have no here the picks, you have no there the shovel and wheelbarrow. And we have to go look for the place where what we have to do is we saw the trees. It's trees for a bridge, trees for a railroad. We have to cut the trees first. Ik zei, waarom gunners met puin? Met the whole night I cannot sleep. He said, I don't know. But the Lord said, you promised to do. I said, I gave it up. No, not your time yet. Not your time. A voice in me, ringing in my. Not ready for you. Every time I gave it up, I get dysentery, malaria. And I say, oh, I better give it up. A voice, he said, no, not ready for you. I said, that's cool, I'm not ready. She whispered in my ear in the night, not ready for you. During the time I trade my shoes with the people there, the elephant boy have always sugar. You know? And he say, no, I like to have your shoes. I trade in with, oh yes, we need that, yeah. We need the nutrition to keep you happy and strong. But yeah, we cannot do that all the time because we have to trade always on clothes, shoes. But during the time I've been already almost naked, I don't have more shoes on.
The president in D.C. Had made the decision that what was going to be done on our action. So what they did is they took our ship, and I think there were 6 other ships that went with us. And in our squad, there's 6 ships, all destroyers.
Ordinary, everyday life. You didn't think about war. I know we had well, there still is what they call the South Shore.
I was glad I heard from people back home, and especially from Betty.
Well, sometimes she has to help the other camp because so many dead. And so we try to do our work. And I've been landed there in Thailand, come 133. And get the help for pest there, the Australians working there. After the help for pest, it's 80 kilometers.
The Navy knew they had to keep the troops busy. So when you weren't working an 8-hour shift, they had activities. They allowed the girls to have baseball teams, and we would play other girl teams on other places around the islands, and they would either come to our place to play on our diamond or we'd go to their place. Well, the only way to move you would be in a big truck, open truck, and they had these well, there'd be a rack or a gate arrangement so that you wouldn't fall off. And that's how we'd go, and of course your hair is blowing like mad because the man's driving maybe 50 miles an hour. But we were going to go and play baseball someplace and see a new area. So I enjoyed that.
It's psychologically very disturbing. But, the people in London, I don't know how they stood it because they suffered through the Blitz. And we used the subway quite frequently. And there were people sleeping, they had their blankets, and they'd sleep down there at night on the platforms. You had to walk around them to get on and off the subway cars, but it was safe down there. So.
And I remember one time a friend of mine and we went into Chicago, and that morning, that was the D-Day. And, you know, you read about it in the paper and you realize that there, you know, it was a serious thing that was happening. But people just had to go along with their regular lives. Fathers had to work and mothers were home.
Because I was fortunate enough after the war, you know, in 1959, which is what, 14 years after the war, I was fortunate to be able to go to Berlin and to see what damage had been done. And it was serious. And of course today, as I like to say, the bombs are smarter than my bombardier was, because they can put an X on a target and hit it. We put an X on a target and maybe we could hit it, maybe we didn't. So.
But during that time I have lost maybe 3,500 prisoner of war with cholera. You know when you have cholera, you wait for your time to go. But during that time, I was sick there, on the floor. Oh, passed away. I said, I always call your mother. People call mother when he passed away. Mom, help me, tell me the Lord. Bring me out of this place.
And there were cases where men had to stay in wet socks and shoes for a couple days because they'd walk through water to get someplace in the swampy areas of the islands. And they couldn't stop and get a pair of dry socks on because they may not have had them with them. And those were the circumstances. The men were in battle, and that's what happened to them as they were doing.
I wasn't 100 feet from where I got off that little raft, pontoon boat, canoe, Higgins boat, whatever you want to call it. You know what a Higgins boat is? Where the door drops down, you know, and you run ashore. I wasn't 100 feet. And this is what changed my life. There was a man on the ground. Three men beside it. One reached up to grab, took his dog tags off, put him over his head and put it in a bag. Another reached his hand and took his ring off his finger, put it in a bag. The other one reached into his back pocket and took out his wallet, put it in a bag. Then someone else would search the rest of the pockets to see if there was personal papers like letters and whatnot. I knew this man on the ground died for me. I knew it. And then they took the body and put it in a plastic bag and went to the far end of the island and put them in rows. 1,100 bodies in 72 hours. At that point, we had lost 1,100 men on Tarawa. I didn't want to die like that. But the man on the ground died for me. I opened my Bible. And I knew that Jesus died for me. Oh, well, one thing was that
men were gone and women had to take over, and a lot of women learned how to work in foundries and automobile works and things. Yes, there was a boy that I know I went through high school with that he lost his life at the Arizona, at Pearl Harbor. No, I don't think people really talked about the war unless somebody that had a child in the service, and then they would, you know, question, do you hear from them and how were they? And well, today students would probably think it was terrible that they were rationed gasoline, and tires were at a premium. You had to have a reason for asking for more tires for a car. Oh yeah, and then they had those slip of the lip will sink a ship, and what was another one? And then all over were the women with factory clothes on, and you know, and a bandana, their hair was tied up, and they were busy. They were working in factories.
Well, I had long wanted to fly, and my mother wasn't too happy with that idea because that was dangerous, but she figured that was probably one of the lesser of the evils of either the walking army or the Navy. As soon as you run low on oxygen, you lose consciousness. And this was demonstrated to us in training, very early in training, when they put us all in what they called an altitude chamber, which was a big tank with seats in it, and they'd pump the air out of it, which simulates going up in altitude. They would ask one of the cadets to volunteer to take off his oxygen mask and to start copying typed message. Well, he started out just really writing it. Pretty soon it became jagged and a little bit illegible. And about that time they said, put your oxygen mask on. And he was, up to that point, he was just happy as a clam. Bombardier said, Nelson, the navigator, is on the floor here. I don't know whether he's wounded or what. And he said, no, he doesn't seem to be wounded, but he seems to be unconscious. And so we found out that what had happened, he'd pulled his oxygen hose off the regulator. Apparently it hadn't been fastened on firmly. And then the oxygen check, since the regulator was on the firewall or the bulkhead behind him, he apparently had not looked. He just said, okay. And his log entry was just like I saw in the oxygen chamber, or the altitude chamber. It was fine, well written, then it began to get scrubbed, and eventually it just trailed off in a line. And he never knew what was happening, and we didn't either, so we lost him on the 10th mission. So that is the most hazardous area in the world, because half of our atmosphere is below 18,000 feet. Above 18,000 feet, within about the next 4,000 or 5,000 feet, you do not have enough oxygen to survive.
They had a special green tank that was filled, that they filled the oxygen with. And nitrogen was usually a black or a brown. And what they did, they cross-threaded, so you had a left-hand thread on the oxygen, so you couldn't, well, on whichever one it was, so you couldn't cross them. There was a B-17 over at Lockburn Air Base that took off, and somebody had painted the wrong cylinder, and they took off, and the darn thing exploded on them on taxi out. So it was pretty dangerous. We were supposed to go out at 5, and another one of the engineers that was on a different airplane had taken off at 3 o'clock in the morning. and they ended up with an oil fire in one of the engines at night. They were out someplace east. I haven't been able to find exactly where they were, they were off probably about 3 o'clock. This was along about 4:30 or so. And we got a radio report that they had an engine fire. Well, the same thing happened. The guys up front didn't have their chutes fastened. The guys in the back did. They got out. And we're supposedly out over the Atlantic Ocean. However, we got an opening in the clouds. We looked down, there was land. Well, everybody got panicky, and they said, well, give us a course to the ocean, because if we'd gone down there, we'd have been in trouble, that's for sure. And about 15 minutes later, we got another break, and we were out over the ocean at that point in a snowstorm. And it took us about 10 hours and 40 minutes to make the flight from Valley Wales down to Marrakesh, Morocco.
Fear of getting shot down, or whenever there was a plane that got hit, we always watched to see how many parachutes came out of it.
I had some good friends that were in the 101st Airborne, and they had to jump at the Battle of the Bulge, and then they jumped in Holland. And well, the stories I heard was that it was not good, pretty gruesome in places.
It was a heated flying suit. It was like long underwear, but it just had all wires in through it. Then you just plugged it into a slot in the airplane. And then you also had a helmet that you put on just before you reached the initial point, and a flak vest. It went over your head and hung down on each side.
The flak was the worst. The gunners all said the same thing. The people who were over there earlier said that when the fighter came in, they had something to do, but you never knew when the flak was going to start appearing, and it would just appear out of the sudden, and it would slam through anything. The shells were timed by the Germans, and it would take about 30 seconds to get up to altitude. And people get the idea that you had to have a direct hit on the aircraft. That wasn't true, because if the shells were exploding up above, you had a curtain of steel coming down through the air, and you flew into it. We got a lot of damage to the airplane just by flying into this curtain of flak that's falling down. Nobody on our crew got hurt. Nobody on our crew got hit at all. And the only exception was that bombardier that got the piece of plexiglass. But other than that, no, nobody on the crew got hurt at all.
We got this new airplane, and we named it Too Young To. We all thought we were too young to go, and we thought we were going to China. But we ended up going to Italy.
German subs would try to give you a wrong radio signals and cause you to crash. Well, while we were there at Goose Bay waiting to take off, there had been a B-24 that had taken off earlier, and he apparently got out of the Greenland ice cap and got lost. And the last radio report that came back from him, and we heard the report when it came in, was that good luck, fellas, on winning the war. They didn't know where they were. It was at night, so I don't know whether they ever found them, for that matter. In the event that we went down in Spain, because Spain was on the side of the Germans at that time, we were supposed to destroy the aircraft and try to get away. If we went down in Portugal, we were supposed to not work with anything but turn ourselves and the aircraft over to the Portuguese authorities. They would radio London. They would send a C-47 down. They would trade the C-47 for the B-17 and its crew, and we'd go back up to England.
Then one other case was when we were in advanced flying school. We were on a night flight, and there was a full moon and a lot of big cumulus clouds, and that was a very beautiful sight. And we just, at that time, of course, two cadets would fly together, and we just flew up and admired the sky. And the third one, of course, was one morning on a mission. We were headed into Germany, and it looked like some giant unseen hand had a piece of chalk, and he drew a white line up the sky. And that was one of the V-2 rockets taken off. And we were amazed at the speed of the thing.
Well, war is hell. It's not good, and makes you think about things, even conditions right now. It seems like no one can get along.
War is a hell of a way to settle an argument. You ought to be able to settle it some other way, because it is extremely destructive. It's interesting. The saying, I wouldn't do it again, but I did it once and I survived, so I think more or less sane.
It was a kind of a cold night and kind of misty, you know, not really raining, but a lot of mist. And I didn't want to take the baby out. And so I went down to the train station and sat there, and I was so nervous. I can't tell you how nervous I was. And then I saw him walking toward me across the floor, and we just collapsed together. I knocked his hat off, really.
I still say, though, that you have to work at something to be successful, and you don't just sit around and wait on it to come to you. It won't. It won't come. You have to go out and do something to deserve the credits that you get.
We had flown all our missions, and when you finish your missions, you got to go home. Although I didn't get to go home right away. I went to Egypt and for 10 days, sort of a rest and relaxation.
Open arms, open arms, and by my parents and my grandmother at the time, and my intended wife. So she was very happy, and 6 months later we got married. So
when I asked her, I said, when do you have to go back to work? And she said, I don't. She said, kind of gets to you a little bit, but when she said when I called her from Washington that I was back in the States, she said I went in the next day and quit. And she said, I'm not working. She said, we'll do whatever you want.
Relationship with the crew, which essentially were my employees, which helped later when I was out of the service and in real life, because I realized that people are individuals and each one of them needs to be treated differently. And you need to determine those differences and act accordingly. So, well, we were in California, and both my wife and I were from Washington, Indiana, and I was getting ready to go back to school, and she only got a 2-week vacation period, so we wanted to come back and visit our parents who lived in Washington. So we investigated coming back by train. It was expensive, about $400. Plus the fact that it would take about half of the time on the train. The airlines were a bit more expensive, and of course we couldn't afford that. So a friend of mine came down, he said, well, what you ought to do is buy an airplane and fly it back. When I was in school after the war, USC, a bunch of us ex-pilots were having lunch and talking, each one was trying to outdo the other. And I told that story, and one of the fellows said, hey, I remember that. I was stationed at that base, and I saw it. So it was a small world.
Because I would be excited and get to see my wife, all those good things. Getting back. So I would be able to get back to see all the people I knew and I loved. And that was a great thing for me.
I had been teaching as a substitute before I got my degree, and I was in a 6th grade room doing that when the teacher was out, and the teacher had lined on the windowsills things that children had brought back as souvenirs from visits they'd been. And one souvenir caught my eye, and I think it was the Eiffel Tower. And I looked down at it, and here was a name that I was familiar with. I called the child up and I said, was your father in the Marine Corps? Uh-huh. I said, was he wounded in the South Pacific? Uh-huh. And you live in this school system? Uh-huh. So he told his dad. And his dad came over the next day. What had happened, the man was getting out of a tank. They have these circle holes that they can get through. And as they get through, they lift themselves up and then rotate themselves out, and then they jump off. He jumped, and his finger, a ring on his finger, had caught one of the screws that held the lid tight, and it jerked the finger off. And naturally, he's shocked, and I'm sure that he or someone else picked up the finger, and they took him to the first aid. And somewhere along the line, before he got to my hospital, they had put his finger inside his chest cavity so that it could get blood supply. So they literally sewed it into the chest area. And that finger was nourished back to her health. Now, I'm not sure it was able to get a clamp on his fingers, but he lived in this neighborhood that I was teaching, substitute in that room that day. And so when the youngster went home and said blah, blah, blah to Dad, Dad took a chance to come by the next day on his way to work. And we, of course, had no relationship at all because we'd each had separate situations of bringing us home. So I hadn't even expected, but the name wasn't Smith or Jones. It was a name that I could remember. And so we had a brief reunion, and he was on his way to work. And that was the end of that. But again, it was the circumstances that surrounded all of this time in the service that made it a companion-like relationship with everybody.
I remember too, after Ray and I we were celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary, and we went to Hawaii because our son in the Navy, he was in the submarine division. He was stationed there, and we made the trip out to the Arizona. They have a tour, and it kind of brought back memories of the day that it happened when you were right there and saw the remains.
But it was quite an experience being in and living through it. And as far as I'm concerned, those of us that lived through World War II were meant to live through. I'm firmly convinced of that because of the amount of people that didn't make it. And there's too many stories of a infantryman going onto an island out in the Pacific, and he goes through unscathed, and a person on either side of him gets killed, and he hits the next island, the same thing happens again, and both the guys on either side of him get killed. There's no other explanation, and you go out of your mind if you try to figure it out. So the only conclusion I can come to is that either we have something to do or our dependents have something to do. And I'm not the only one that's expressed that same view either.